Welcome to the audiocast, starting your first case on time every time. I'm Joe Tamaro. I'm the General Manager of Accelero Health Partners. Joining me today is Tim Sweeten. Tim leads our perioperative division here at Accelero Health Partners. We know with the changing demographics in the patient population, there are going to be more patients that will need joint replacements. And for the most part, hospitals have good margins on these cases and want to do more. So we're going to examine in the next few audiocasts reasons that limit or can be corrected to allow hospitals to do more joint replacement cases in the same amount of time. That difference between doing 3, 4, or 5 cases is absolutely critical. So one of the most important ways to get those extra cases is to start your first case on time. So Tim, generally in orthopedics, what do you see as far as the first case on time start as far as percentage? And then also, how do you define first case on time start?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Great questions. So to the first question, we maintain a database of tens of thousands of orthopedic cases. And out of that, we can run lots of different types of metrics. One of them is first case on time start. And what we find is the median for orthopedic cases is right at 70%. Now you asked a second question, which we believe is really important as well, and that is, how do we define first case on time start? We think it is critically important to measure to the minute. And what I mean by this is, if a case is scheduled to go into the room at 7:30, we measure against 7:30, not 7:31, but 7:30. It's important for everyone to really be focused on minutes because, as you know, minutes matter.
So Tim, with only 70% of the cases starting on time, what are the reasons? What are the top 2 or 3 reasons why those cases don't start on time?
I would say the top 3 reasons are patient preparedness, and that's making sure the patient is optimized and ready for surgery. The second one is ensuring the schedule supports efficiency, and that's getting the right people, the right types of patients on the schedule for the first case. And the last is not having a defined process, and that is essentially getting everybody on board with what actions need to happen and when to ensure a first case on time start.
So Tim, what I want to do is I want to take those 3 reasons: patient preparedness, scheduling, and lack of a defined process. Let's break those down. So let's start with patient preparedness. What do you mean when you talk about patient preparedness?
Yeah, what I mean is the patient arrives on time, but there are too many outstanding items that need to be addressed for that patient to be rolled back to the OR on time. For instance, we were at a hospital recently, and this is by no means unusual, where the patient chart was reviewed by anesthesia about a week before the day of surgery, but then again by another anesthesiologist on the day of surgery. That second anesthesiologist had different thoughts about how the patient should be prepared, and so it caused him to have to rerun many of the tests. This caused delays, and that's not unusual. The solution for this issue was for anesthesia department to settle on a pre-surgical workup algorithm between themselves. So on the day of surgery, there are no surprises. Now, there are other issues that have to be addressed, certainly, particularly patient education issues. Every patient must go through a prescribed, established education process to ensure they are prepared for their surgery, their length of stay on the unit, as well as their recovery at home.
So Tim, on this patient preparation, some of this has to occur the day of surgery. You have to have that in place. And also, a lot of it has to do with things well before surgery that have to be put in place. So that's an important component of it. You also mentioned this concept of scheduling. How do you then create the right schedule to allow that first case to start on time?
Yeah. Many hospitals I work with initially did not have guidelines on the type of patient that would qualify as a first case slot. For example, unhealthy patients or patients that have not gone through the pre-admission and education process fully, those require more attention on the day of surgery. First cases have to be as predictable as possible. I recommend having guidelines in place for those patients. So I'm going to go through an example of a few guidelines that we help implement with our clients. This is not a complete list, but to give you an idea of what I'm talking about. So one thing to consider is that the schedule has to be set at least 2 weeks prior to the surgical day. Estimated times on that schedule have to be reliable. The definitions and descriptions in the scheduling system must be correct, and the preference cards have to be accurate. Another thing to consider is that the schedule needs to be closed for elective cases by 10 a.m. the day before surgery. This allows the time for the hospital to contact the patients, to tell them when to arrive for their surgery, and so on.
So Tim, the third reason you talked about was this concept of process. And, as you work with hospitals and your team works with them, I know there's a focus on process. And we're going to talk about this throughout all of our audio casts, but talk about the role of having the right process to start that first case on time.
It is absolutely critical. I've been in hundreds of hospitals over my career, and the vast majority do not have a defined process for getting patients to the OR for the first case on time. They'll say they do, and most can even articulate what needs to happen before the patient goes back. But in order for that to happen consistently, the order of activities and who's responsible for those things to happen is largely unknown by those hospitals. Now, the solution for this is for all the stakeholders, and when I say that, I mean surgeons, anesthesia, OR staff, manager, basically anybody whose work impacts the first case patient flow. All those individuals come together and flow out the optimal steps and the timing to move the patient through to have an on-time start. Coordinating all activities and their timing, if you want an on-time start, could look like this. Patient in pre-op at 6:30 a.m. The nurse interview happens at 6:40, blood draw at 6:50, anesthesia interview and consent signed at 7 a.m. The surgeon marking needs to happen by 7:15. All of this will allow for the patient to be pushed back at 7:25 and be in the room at 7:30.
Tim, you mentioned the surgeon. This is a key point. I hear so many hospital managers say, well, we could start on time if the surgeon would arrive. I hear surgeons saying, well, I would be there early if the hospital was ready. What have you seen? How do you get through this dilemma?
That problem is real and it is widespread. But before we can cast blame solely on the docs, you have to ask a few questions. One, do they know what time that they are needed? Is it established? Is it well known? When I conduct peri-op analysis, I usually ask the surgeon, staff, and administrators what time is the first case and what time do people need to be to arrive. And frequently, I will get different answers. Have the surgeons been asked, or are they required to be in different places at that same time? Do they need to be rounding on patients, grand rounds, morning meetings, and so on? Or they just simply wait to be called. That's what they've learned, right? I was speaking with a surgeon in Sweden that I was working with recently, and the topic came up of what you will be remembered for. And I thought he might talk about some of his research or the thousands of patients he's helped. And he said, I will be remembered for saying, I'll be there in a minute. He's always having to get called and pulled in because the process was not set. Then thirdly, have those surgeons learned that they don't need to be there on time. We ask our surgeons to do so much. And so when they have to wait, they usually think about all the other things they could or they should be doing.
Tim, you mentioned at the beginning of this, first case on time start, average somewhere 60 to 70%. I know you've worked with hospitals getting them to a benchmark between 95 and all of their cases starting on time, first cases.
Right.
What have you done to be successful?
Well, after considering all the things I mentioned above, all the hospitals I work with, we encourage them to pursue continuous improvement. So what that means is those hospitals measure performance, they post performance that's transparent, and they offer rewards when those goals are achieved to everybody. Over time, this just really becomes how we do business. So when you have new people come into the system, new surgeons, new staff members, it is the expectation that first cases begin on time.
Tim, great. Thanks for your insight today. Absolutely, to start your first case on time, you really need to have those three areas in place. The patient has to be prepared. You've got to have the schedule set right. You have to have defined process. And again, you have to have a tight definition. Okay, if the goal is to start at 7:30, then start at 7:30, not 7:32, not 7:35. That really sets the tone for the day. So again, thanks again. This concludes today's discussion on starting your first case on time. Should you have any questions or if there's other topics in perioperative that you want to discuss, please reach out to your local Zimmer sales team member and they can facilitate a discussion with Tim or one of the members of his team. The other way to reach us is very simply to go on our website, accelerohealth.com, and go to the Contact Us section, and you can absolutely reach out to us there. So thanks, and looking forward to more audiocast.